Greetings, this is Eugene the Philosopher, the greatest living philosopher after the unfortunate passing of Quentin Robert de Nameland, who has been the greatest living philosopher before me. In this video, I wish to discuss the possibilities and already ongoing tendencies of what I call the new segregation, and potentially maybe somebody else calls it like that, but anyways, for the purposes of this video, let's call it that. Alright, and but before we're gonna talk about segregation per se, let's notice a similar concept known as discrimination. So my claim would be that segregation is a special case of discrimination, but a more profound one, if you wish. So later we'll focus on more profound potential for like what's already going on, of the tendencies that are already in place, all right, in the future, I mean. Hence, like new segregation out of already existing discrimination, something like that. Okay, so what is discrimination? Well, it's basically, if you look at the like Latin meaning of this word, it basically means like separating people, right? Well, not necessarily people, but in this case, it's people. So we're separating people into groups, which have different properties, if you wish, which have different rights and privileges, or don't have these rights or privileges, something like that, right? At least potentially. And of course, discrimination have been a big issue, both in terms of like being a problem and in terms of being like a feat, if you wish, like a property of a certain like historical period, or historic. I think it's historical, right? I don't know. So anyway, and it has been the case throughout history, but it's still the case today. Sometimes people say negative discrimination versus positive discrimination, but it's the same. I mean, you subdivide people into groups based on some of their properties of the peoples. I mean, so it's not negative or positive, it's just discrimination, anyways, right? So, in particular, like, we can talk about discrimination by legal status, like, think about, for example, nationality, like, only, basically, most of the countries have some privileges for people of this nationality, of this country, right? Versus, like, let's say, people of other nationalities, or people without nationality in the first place. So that's a clear discrimination, right? We have discrimination by gender. Again, we have like male and female bathrooms and stuff, and think about like divorce courts, how they work, etc. Think about like again male and female prisons. Think about well, a lot of examples, like male and female sports. What else is there? Well, a lot of examples, really, right? So that's a clear discrimination by gender or sex, whatever you prefer. Like I still maintain that these are synonyms. Basically, we have discrimination by age. Like if you are below a certain age, you cannot get married, you cannot drink alcohol, you cannot like own weapons if it's still allowed in your country by some miracle. You cannot drive a car, you cannot sign contracts, you cannot work, etc., etc., you know. So that's a clear ageism, how's it called, right? Discrimination by age, discrimination by physical condition, like physical health. Like if you have like some serious heart disease, you cannot become an astronaut, let's say, or whatever. I mean, you can think about many other examples. Discrimination by occupation, like if you're like, let's say, served in the military, or you've been like like a firefighter or something like that, like you can receive various privileges like earlier retirement or higher like pension, like retirement money or something like that, etc., etc. Discrimination by profession, and by the way, like it's kind of, I don't know, confusing, I guess would be the word. It's kind of strange to me that, you know, the US with their support the troops kind of thing, still have all these homeless war veterans on the streets. It's kind of really interesting, let's say. That's how it looks to an untrained eye, let's say. We can have discrimination by professional skills, like if you don't have a certain experience in a certain job or a certain training, you wouldn't be allowed for this job, you know, something like that. So all of these are clear examples of discrimination, where one group of people receives one type of treatment, the other group of people or many others receive other type of treatment, right? And here I wish to also mention the concept, which I think is kind of important. Again, returning to the ANCAP/libertarian type of morality and philosophy, like political philosophy, about so-called private discrimination. That's the concept I want to discuss briefly. So I deeply believe that it should be allowed, like because, like, what is private discrimination? Well, let's say if I don't want to have anything to do with you, I can do that. Like, you know, like there was this famous case where a bakery refused to bake a cake for like a gay wedding or something like that. And I think they were sued or something for that and probably lost. So I don't know the outcome of this story, but the issue was exactly that. Like, are they able to privately discriminate? Like, if they don't like gay marriages, should they bake the cake anyway, right? So I claim no. If they don't want to do it, they should, like, it's their right not to do it, basically, right? So that's the private discrimination. Whereas some other people state that no, they should do it. They should be forced to do it, even if they don't want to. And it should become clear why this is my position, that they shouldn't be forced to do it, right? Because, well, that's a compulsory act, right? It's a violent act upon them, essentially, from the government or whatever other agency there is, and this should not be the case. I mean, they are not obliged to bake this cake, right? It's their right to enter a voluntary agreement with the other party, but if one party disagrees, they shouldn't be forced by the government to still agree to provide this service or these goods or whatever. So I feel like it's kind of important. But unfortunately, I think in most of the countries, private discrimination is not a thing. Like, you cannot do that, and it's really unfortunate, I think. But anyway, so yeah, so that was like a broader topic of discrimination, right? Now we're going to be talking about a narrower topic, which is segregation. And what it is it's a discrimination to an nth degree, let's say. It's a more profound case of discrimination, all right? Which is like almost literally like physical removal, you know, in Hoppian terms, wink wink, of certain groups of people, right? Like for example, physically separating one group from the other, right? There's a toilet for white people, there's a toilet for black people, you know, something like that. So yeah, so it's basically like an extreme example would be a direct physical separation, right? So segregation and separation are kind of synonymous as well. And obvious I mean, there are kind of milder examples, like without physical separation, but it's something to that effect, right? Okay, and the obvious examples are like apartheid in South Africa, or the US is famous for the segregation era, etc. But there are also many examples in other parts of the world, like in Asia. There's a lot of like things related to that, or at least historically there has been, but to a degree there still is. In Europe, like think about the segregation of Jews, etc., etc. And of course it sometimes happens kind of naturally, where like think about like a Chinatown in any large city, where it's basically, yeah, it's like Chinese are just bunching together, and it kind of produces segregation naturally, right? They're just physically kind of barring themselves from all the other parts of the city to a degree, right? Sticking together. And many other issues like that, not issues, but phenomena like that, I guess, are also, can be observed in like cities and stuff. to a degree, you might say like Mormons in Utah is also like in a way a segregation type of phenomenon, right? Okay. Yeah. So, but why do I call it new segregation, right? So what is new? What exactly is new? Well, because it's gonna happen, right? It's happening now, even though we've had like a period of, let's say, roughly 1990s and 2000s, where it looked like it actually stopped, like segregation almost disappeared, except for those sort of quasi-natural cases that I mentioned previously. But now we seem to be moving more and more into some sort of new segregation. So hence I call it new, right? So some examples might include, but are not limited to, again, like gender segregation and racial segregation, in particular in the US, for example, like where we have like safe spaces for women or some stuff like that, you know, where men are not allowed. And by the way, you cannot have male-only spaces, like this is not allowed. You can have female-only something, but not male-only something, because that would be sexist, right? And see my video Understanding Gender, where I describe why that is the case. And long story short, it's because male gender is expendable, right? So nobody cares about men. That's one thing. And about racial segregation, like there are serious discussions today, like, for example, separating children in school into separate classes for like black and white people, for example, right? So that's literally just a new segregation, right? It's literally racism as it is. So yeah, racial segregation is a part of like overall broader approach of racism, right? So okay. Yeah, but these are only like, well, they are important, but I don't want to talk about these particular examples. I want to talk about two, I think, even more impactful examples of new segregation that are already arising, and I believe would arise even more, like exponentially accelerate sometime later. But, however, here I should note that it's the same comment I've made in my Patreon exclusive video. It's only 8 minutes long, so it's not a big deal. Return to Normality, where I talk about how what we observe today is only like a demo version of what's going to happen next. However, we're going to experience a certain like lessening of these things soon, when the corona wars would be over, right? But then it's going to appear again. We're just sort of like testing the technology at this moment, right? So it's not yet in full swing, the whole thingy that's going to appear. And the two important issues I wish to talk about here in particular is, first issue is money, and the second is information. So let's talk about money a little bit. So money, or like, well, okay, I wouldn't say power, but money is kind of a proxy for power. But let's be a more technocratic here and talk just about money. So money used to be like a unified measure, right, of people, if you wish, independent of any other factors connected to those people, like race, age, physical health, occupation, or whatever I mentioned previously at the beginning, right? So, which basically meant that you either have the money necessary to buy this stuff, or you don't, right? So this is the only factor. So it's kind of like a universal equalizer of people. So you may be whoever you are, just have enough money and you'll be able to acquire whatever this particular thing that you wish, okay? You have the money, you get the thing, right? So that's sort of like a discrimination, but it's a very flat one, right? Everyone is discriminated in the same way, right? In some way. Like, I'm not racist, I hate all the people equally, that kind of thing. So, but in the recent years, like more or less decades, but years even more so, we observe an obvious decline of cash, right? And the cash used to be this tool that allowed you to use the money anonymously, right? Well, obviously, like, one of the reasons why people argue against cash is exactly that it allows you to stay anonymous, and therefore all the terrorists, all the drug dealers, all the weapons producers, like illegal whatever, can use cash, right, without being tracked. However, that in this way or another, it means that decline of cash means that anonymity is disrupted, and that's, I mean, it's a long-standing debate of people defending anonymity and people offending anonymity, if you wish. But it's a particular example of this as well. So, as the anonymity is being disrupted by disappearance of cash, it's one of the phenomena that makes it possible. We have the advent of this so-called social capital, you know, in the social credit score type of sense, you know, the Chinese famous social credit score, which means that money alone is no longer enough. It's no longer like a flat measurement of what you can acquire. You need something else on top of money, or below money, or besides money, if you wish. Right? So in a way, now your persona, like whoever you are, so all these other potential factors like age, health, gender, race, occupation, etc., they all can come into play now, right? Or your behavior, like, or your buying preferences, as it is in China already, right? It all may become a factor now in terms of deciding of what you can acquire on your money or with your money. So now you can be ultra rich even, but without, you know, supporting documents like QR codes, roughly speaking. You can't afford stuff anymore, right? So money alone is not enough, because your money is like transparently visible to the government and whatever other supporting institutions. And there's also your name, your social credit score, your like history of doing stuff, like your whole genealogy, maybe even the history of your family, like whatever lawsuits against you, or your like administrative punishments or whatever. All of that is there now, right? And all of that influences, or potentially influences, but it will obviously eventually, what you can buy on your money. And that's a big problem, right? I mean, even your bank account is not safe anymore. I mean, you can be like severely bullied on Twitter, let's say, by woke warriors, etc., and you'll lose your bank account even. I mean, there were cases like that, right? So money itself is no longer enough, let's say, all right? And it would become progressively worse in this sense, I would say. So now, without the supporting thingies, even having the money, you can't afford stuff, because now you're like maybe like a second or third even class citizen, right? So it sort of produces, I don't know, like leads to reintroduction of basically medieval practices, you know, when, for example, we've had like estates of the realm, you know, like 3 estates, like the aristocracy, the clergy, and the peasants, basically, right? Or well, whatever you wish to discriminate them into, right? Or like a caste system in India or in Asia in general, and things like that. And of course, there, even like historically in Western civilization, I mean historically, like in modern times, roughly speaking, there were as well examples of something like that, of like social status being a factor, a big factor. When we're talking about this proverbial old versus new money, you know, like Great Gatsby and stuff. So there have always been sort of like a tug of war. Like the big guys don't want to allow other guys to become big because, well, they don't want to share their power, right? So old money wants to kick the new money out, sort of. And even to a larger degree, like the old aristocracy, they obviously don't want to share power with the new bourgeoisie, you know, the capitalists. So aristocracy tries to, like, at least assimilate parts of capitalists into their realm and maybe like kick the others out or something like that. But anyway, there's a clear, even to this day, there's a clear struggle. I wouldn't call it struggle, but animosity between aristocracy and capitalists. Like, to a degree, they've already fused together, but not by much, to be honest, especially if you look at places like Britain. All right, and by the way, like, the USA is a hegemon and Britain is a sub-hegemon. It's kind of actually illustrates that it's actually the capitalists who are now ruling the world. I mean, roughly speaking, represented by the US versus aristocrats, roughly speaking, represented by the UK. So the power dynamic is actually already in favor of capitalists, and it has been for like 70 years roughly, right? After the World War II, that's what I mean. But okay, so yeah, I guess kind of became a bit muffled, but the conclusion to this sub-rant about money. But yeah, let me just like quickly summarize it. That okay, I'll do it in conclusions. Never mind. So yeah, I'll just basically repeat my last point that this segregation in terms of money usage allows us to, well, not us, and allows in a bad sense of the word still, but the reintroduction of these medieval practices, right? Like separating people. Like if you're not a member of aristocracy, you cannot wield a sword, let's say, right? Even though you have enough money to buy it. Or if you're not a member of aristocracy, you are not allowed to visit this restaurant or whatever, right? Even though you have enough money to buy whatever is sold there. This kind of stuff. So now, if you don't have a QR code, you may have enough money to buy something, but you can't because you don't have a QR code, right? You're not the new aristocracy, you know, or whatever. I mean, in a literal sense, elites don't need any QR codes, right? We all know that. But it's the general population that is getting segregated. Elites still remain the elites, right? They're fine, and they will be. Again, see my video, The Great Reset, where I talk about that there's not going to be any great reset, and everything that's going to happen is going to happen to you, like a regular person, not to the elites, right? I mean, there would be no reset of power between the elites and the regular folk. So, okay. And obviously, again, I'll link all the mentioned videos in the description under this one. Okay, so that was one important issue or instance of segregation that is gonna follow. I mean, it's already happening, but it's gonna only increase later, again, after a short lull of maybe like 10 to 15 years. But then it's gonna accelerate really, really rapidly. We're just only testing the technologies right now during these corona wars that we have today. So, another, and perhaps the most important instance of segregation that is already happening is segregation in terms of access to information, right? Well, at the very least, discrimination in terms of access to information. So, obviously, again, throughout history, like, the elites had the most access to the information always. And it's kind of fine. I mean, it's not, but people are kind of okay with that, because again, what are you going to do about that? Like there are all these intelligence services, and like they know much more than we do, but what are you going to do about that? Okay. Still, that's already the same type of segregation that I talked about, like just now, that there's the elites with their access to information, and there's general population with much lower access. But still, again, with the advent of the internet, and actually like the increase in what's the word, literacy has also helped a lot. I mean, people started reading books, etc., much more than previously, and now we have the internet and all the other cool stuff. So the general population's access to information has significantly increased, right? And it's not good for the elites, right? Because again, their monopoly on the information is kind of dwindling already. So they need to do something about this. So they will definitely, to a degree they already do, but they will try to control your access to the information, right? And of course, right now, everyone is sort of overhyped about the cancel culture. It's kind of, I mean, it's an absolutely stupid combination of words, in my opinion. But whatever, like for some reason, especially Americans like to add the word culture to anything. I don't know. I mean, it sounds really stupid, but whatever. We'll work with what we have. I mean, since it's already sort of a meme in itself, let's use that. So we have cancel culture today, where someone can be canceled, i.e. basically removed from the media spaces, right? Everywhere. Because, well, they've like offended someone, they made something bad, whatever the heck. But I claim that it's only like the cancel culture 1.0 that we're observing today. Yeah, like you haven't seen the real cancel culture yet. And you might ask, well, what's it gonna be? Like, are they gonna cancel more and more people so that even like smaller bloggers would be hit by it, by some like wicked matrix type algorithms that would seek out everyone and punish them? Certainly that would happen, but it still would be cancel culture 1.0, maybe 1.5 or 1.25, something like that, right? What I'm talking about is much more serious. It's cancel culture 2.0, if you wish, and that is when it's applied not to producers of the information, but to consumers of the information, all right? So what do I mean? Roughly speaking, when you can't cancel the reader of the Twitter of Donald Trump rather than the Twitter of Donald Trump, all right? So you cancel the reader instead of canceling Trump. So, and again, returning to these new technical possibilities, like you have no QR code, you have no internet, my friend, right? So you are now in the cast of non-internet users, you know, something like that. Like, who knows, maybe in the next decades we'll have, like, again, chips or brain-to-machine interfaces or like DNA scanners at your, Wi-Fi router. Or like a 7G router or whatever, to allow you to actually, enter the internet, or like fingerprints. We already have the technology on our mobiles, right? To confirm your identity and to like make sure that you are allowed into the internet or into certain websites or into certain blogs or whatever, right? I mean, it's already like on the horizon. I think it's not something completely out of imagination even. I mean, it's easy to imagine like happening in a year from now, I think. They just need some again stupid propagandist excuse to implement that. But it might be just protecting the vulnerable groups of people who might be offended, or some shit like that. It's really easy to come up with. So yeah, that would be a really big problem, right? This cancel culture 2.0, because in 1.0, roughly speaking, Trump can gather supporters to sort of uncancel himself, right? He can like use other media or whatever. I mean, he's a big guy. You can't remove him from everywhere, right? Like, if he asks some journalists for an interview, they would immediately agree, most likely, right? So Trump can uncancel himself, but a reader of Trump, like a single consumer of any type of information, cannot uncancel themselves, because it's them against everyone else, the world, the governments, actually the world, but the governments without air quotes, right? Because the governments only supposedly represent the world, whereas in reality they actually represent like anti-world, in my opinion. But my stance on these issues. Okay. So that would be, roughly speaking, all that I wanted to say. Just with regards to this specific topic, I've already mentioned that, the question is, how do we try to surpass it, right? What can we do about it? And I believe that, probably at this stage, just looking for alternative platforms might be the answer. But obviously, some new technology would be needed anyway. Like, I don't know, maybe, some alternative protocols or something like that, I don't know. However, the problem is that big tech is being controlled and licensed and stuff by the governments, right? By the elites. So therefore, it's unlikely that they would allow you to do stuff like that. Therefore, we still can do that to a degree, but then the possibilities would be reduced to zero eventually. And eventually we'll have to, I think, we would have to resort to like DIY solutions, like black market, like, how do you call it? Like, forgery of all these necessary documents, like completely made up personalities and stuff like that. So maybe again, like the true cyberpunk, is gonna happen when you'll have to be able to acquire something like that in order to even live, so yeah. I mean, or otherwise you would be again like a test tube. How do you call it? Like. Test subject for all these infinite injections and all kinds of other practices they would like to test on the people, etc., etc. Yeah, I think that would be all. So let's conclude this rant. So firstly, I talked about the concept of discrimination, right? How is it basic? It is basically a separation of people into groups with different rights and privileges, right? And segregation is a special case of discrimination, which is kind of more ferocious, if you wish, more intense, where in the limit case, you just physically separate different groups of people, right? That is segregation. And what is new in new segregation is that, it's new. However, it's like on a new technological level, so it allows you to segregate in, again, a much more wicked and vile manner. And older forms of segregation would still be present, like gender and race, definitely. However, two more important, I believe, new forms of segregation are gonna arise, and that is segregation in terms of money like not money per se, but like the new implementation of money, which is that the amount of funds you have is no longer enough to buy something, because not only you have to have enough funds, but you have to have, roughly speaking, social credit score enough to acquire something. Like you offend someone on Twitter, minus 100 social credit score. You buy a bottle of alcohol, minus 200 social credit score, or whatever. Like you get a fine for parking in the wrong spot, minus like 150 or whatever. So hopefully you get what I mean. Like I've described it in quite a bit of detail in the body of the video, so to speak. And the second instance of this possible and most likely forthcoming new segregation is the access to information. So I've introduced the concept of cancel culture 2.0, where it is not the producer of information, i.e., for example, a blogger, is being cancelled, but the consumer of the information is being cancelled, i.e., you are just being denied access to the internet or certain parts of the internet, as an example, in the first place, so you can't even read whoever you wish to read. And that would be a very, very logical step in terms of control of access to the information by the elites, who have all the information anyway. However, it is completely in the realm of this, divide et impera approach, divide and conquer, right? So if you cancel Donald Trump, a big outrage appears, right? Because almost everyone knows Donald Trump, not personally, obviously, but almost everyone at least heard about Donald Trump, and a significant portion of these people may be unhappy with him being cancelled, right? However, if you as an individual are being cancelled like that, like absolute majority of the world's population have no idea who you are, and Donald Trump, I'm sure, doesn't know who you are, and therefore, like, you would just like disappear from the world, and like you wouldn't have access to anything, right? So that's a big issue. And again, it's not clear how we're gonna deal with this, right? I mean regular people. It's obviously it's not concerning the elites anyway, even though even the elites can use this to sort of again gain advantage against each other. Like they can potentially like kick somebody out of the elite into the non-privileged class, right? Something like that, of non-internet users or whatever. But we'll see. Yeah, I guess that would be all. Is there anything else I wanted to say? Well, subscribe to me on Patreon. There's like 2 exclusive videos at the moment. Or donate through PayPal. That's also very appreciated. Probably that's all for now. Yeah. Thank you for watching. The eons are closing.